pandemic. And the smile on his face this morning? At long last, there is unity among Senate Democrats when it comes to supporting a long-stalled bill designed to help fight climate change, cut healthcare costs, and raise taxes on corporations. But there are more challenges ahead for Mr. Biden, including a national public health crisis with rapidly spreading monkeypox cases, and new backlash from the Chinese following Speaker Pelosi's trip to Taiwan. Finally, Campaign 22 is shaping up as a highly unusual one. We'll look at the Trump impact that's influencing Republican primary candidates and the tactics Democrats are using to try and defeat them. It's all just ahead on Face the Nation. Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. As we come on the air, the Senate is poised to make the biggest investment to fight global warming in history, with the hopes of reducing carbon emissions 40% by 2030. This long-stalled bill will now expand credits for the manufacture and purchase of electric vehicles, fund rebates for energy-efficient appliances, allocate money to fight drought in western states, and help vulnerable communities impacted by climate change. The bill also cuts healthcare costs by lowering premiums and extending subsidies, and it caps out-of-pocket Medicare drug costs for seniors at $2,000 a year. To pay for all of that spending, the bill calls for a 15% corporate minimum tax on companies that book income of more than $1 billion a year, and will provide money for the IRS to crack down on tax enforcement. With the Senate split 50-50 between the parties, Vice President Kamala Harris is expected to break the tie, which would give Democrats a much-needed boost headed into the November midterm elections. And we go now to Capitol Hill and Florida Senator Rick Scott, who is in between votes on the Senate floor. He's also the head of the Republican Senate Campaign Committee, working to retake control of the Senate. Senator Scott, good morning. I know you have been up all night, so I appreciate you joining this morning.
I hope I'm coherent.
Well, no matter what, it does not look like there is any way to stop what is expected to be a very big win here for Democrats. And I know you're opposed to it, but I want to press you on that, because isn't expanding Medicare access good for a state like yours, which has more residents reliant on the Affordable Care Act than any other state? And Republicans like reducing the deficit. The CBO says this will reduce it by $100 billion over the next decade. Isn't there some good stuff in here for you too?
So, Margaret, here's the way I look at it. Right now, this bill actually ought to be called the War on Seniors Act. I mean, this is a war on Medicare. You look at this. This is a $280 billion cut in Medicare. So what's going to happen is Medicare's going to get cut, and there's going to be seniors that don't get life-saving drugs because the pharmaceutical industry will not be able to have to.
Reducing Medicare costs is not the same as reducing benefits, though. You know that.
Margaret, it's $280 billion that would have been spent. It was anticipated to be spent. It's not going to be spent now. And the drug companies that would be doing more research are not going to be able to spend the money on research. There will be life-saving drugs that seniors will not get. On top of that, I mean, they're going to raise taxes by over $700 billion. And let's remember, companies don't end up paying the taxes. Shareholders pay the taxes. Lower income for the employees pay the taxes. Less investment pays the taxes. So this $700 billion is actually going to hurt the economy. And then while gas prices are $2 more than they were when Joe Biden took office, there's an excise tax on gas. So why would you, we're in a recession. Why would you be increasing the cost of government, increasing taxes?
So the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget called your claim there that you just reiterated in terms of Medicare spending completely misleading. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that just about 1% of new drugs would be affected by the changes there on drug development. So how do you respond to that?
Wait a minute. What if it's your grandmother? Is not 1% important? If it impacts a life-saving drug that we could do now, we shouldn't be cutting Medicare like this. I don't believe it. And by the way, we should be raising taxes ever, but especially in a recession. And why would we be raising the taxes on gas right now when it's $2 above what it was when Joe Biden took office. This is going to continue to drive us into a bigger recession than we are. Look at where we are right now. Labor participation rate's low. Wages not staying with inflation. 2 quarters of negative GDP. I mean, Joe Biden's pushed us, and these plans are pushing us into a recession. So I think we got to stop raising taxes. We've got to make it easier for businesses to build their businesses, compete, and we'll get more jobs.
Well, we just had that stellar July jobs number, but we're going to dig into the specifics of that ahead with economist Mary Daly. Let me talk to you about the politics of all of this. Republicans have been hoping to ride the high inflation we are at, and it is historic high, and President Biden's low approval ratings to a win in November. But the president and Democrats just had a really good streak here. Gas prices are down. You have this massive spending bill going through. These are a lot of big wins for Democrats. The president just authorized that strike to take out the leader of Al-Qaeda. Isn't this going to get harder for Republicans to get the edge that you were trying to manufacture here?
Well, that sounds good, right? But that's a White House talking point. But let's think about this. 72% of Americans believe we're heading the wrong track. Biden's numbers are in the tank. And if you look at all the Democrats running, they have to basically, they're a surrogate for Joe Biden and Chuck Schumer. I mean, they have to defend inflation, high gas prices, the Afghan withdrawal, an open border, critical race theory, defunding the police. That's what they have to defend, because that's what Biden's known for, and that's basically what Democrats are known for. Now, it's going to be it's an election year. It's going to be a hard year. We have 21 Republicans up, only 14 Democrats. The Democrats are outracing us, but we have good candidates, and I believe Joe Biden is going to be our key here.
You said it'll be a hard year. I want to play for you what Republican leader Mitch McConnell told Fox last week.
I think it's going to be a very tight, we have a 50-50 Senate now, we have a 50-50 nation, and I think when this Senate race smoke clears, we're likely to have a very, very close Senate still, with either us up slightly or the Democrats up slightly.
If things are so bad, then why is it going to be so tight for Republicans?
Well, first off, we have very good candidates. I mean, the Democrats are raising good money, so we've got to be able to get our message out. So, we have to raise our money. We have to work hard. We went through a lot of primaries. But I believe we're gonna win. But it's gonna be hard. We got to raise our money. We got to work really hard. Our candidates have to work really hard. Everybody has got to help our candidates. But I'm optimistic.
So, but you do agree it's going to be tight, that Republicans have at best a slight edge?
I'm very optimistic, but I'm realistic that you have to raise your money. The Democrats are raising good money. Joe Biden is our key here. And by the way, this bill is not going to help Democrats. It's going to help Republicans. Raising taxes $700 billion, cutting Medicare $280 billion, raising gas taxes, having 87,000 more IRS agents. Do you know how happy people are to have more IRS agents out there? I mean, this is not going to be popular around the country.
In a local radio interview in July, you talked a lot about your business as an executive, and you said we should start electing people that we would hire. In Georgia, Herschel Walker, Republican Senate candidate, has lied about the number of children he has, about his business dealings. His ex-wife said he held a gun to her head and said, "I'm going to blow your effing brains out." In Arizona, the candidate Blake Masters called the Unabomber an underrated thinker. He said that Al-Qaeda doesn't actually pose substantial threat to Americans. I mean, I've got a list of candidates here who've had said some pretty troubling things. Would you hire these people to work for you?
Well, you'd go through each person, but I'm not the one doing it. It's the voters of those states are doing it. The voters of those states are going to make a choice.
You're trying to help Senate Republicans and lead them to victory. These are your candidates.
So, Margaret, you have to remember, the voters in Arizona choose who they're going to vote. And what they're going to choose is they're going to choose between Blake Masters and Mark Kelly. Mark Kelly has voted to keep the border open. He has never voted for border security. He's voted for the tax increases. He's voted for cutting Medicare. He's voted with Chuck Schumer and with Joe Biden basically 100% of the time. Warnock's got the same problem. This election is going to be about Joe Biden. And so this election is going to be about all the bad things that have happened. The fact that we're going into recession, the fact that inflation's at 9%, the fact that gas prices are up $2, all these things. That's what people are looking at.
But these are your Senate Republican candidates. These are your candidates.
And the voters of each of these states. The voters of these states are going to decide if they're going to hire. Now, I get to vote. I get to vote in Florida, and that's how I think about it. But the voters in those states will choose in those states who they want, and it's a choice between two people. But look, all the Democrat nominees are basically Biden clones.
Yeah.
And by the way, they won't.
But if you are, I mean, you would acknowledge that if somebody went in for an interview for a private corporation, these things would come up as red flags to HR. So it's just
Biden is not campaigning with anybody because he's toxic. That's how the voters think. That's why they say 72% of Americans say the economy's on the wrong track. When that happens, people say, I'm going to take a serious look at somebody else. Right? And our candidates have to go tell them what they're going to do, and we're going to make sure that everybody knows exactly who the Democrats are. That's what's going to happen all across the country, and we're going to have races. And we'll see what happens.
Are you advising all of your candidates in these races to accept the outcome of their elections, since so many of them are questioning still the outcome of the 2020 race?
Well, Margaret, just remember, that's exactly what happened to me with Bill Nelson and Mark Elias. They didn't accept the outcome of the election, and they tried to illegally count ballots after Election Day after I won by 57,000 votes. So election security is very important to me. And I want to make sure we do everything we can to make sure people know that the election is fair. We're already putting together teams, which I had to do in Florida in 2018, teams of lawyers and volunteers to make sure these elections are fair.
But you accept the elections are, the integrity of these races that all your candidates are in, or you're only going to have a problem with them if they lose?
Well, I want free and fair elections, so I'm going to work hard to make sure these elections are fair. Then everybody will get to decide at the time. So I'm still frustrated with what happened to my race. We spent millions of dollars to make sure we won, and we won election night, and they tried to count illegal ballots after election night, and that's wrong.
Very quickly, before I let you go, do you think that the U.S. military should be deployed to defend Taiwan if China makes a move on it?
I think we've got to be very clear that we will defend Taiwan. We've got to be very clear exactly what's going to happen to China with exactly what sanctions is going to happen to China if they invade Taiwan. I think all American businesses need to understand that they're at risk right now if they're doing business there. And I think every American, whenever they see a box that says made in China, they ought to send it back to whoever sent it to them and say, I'll never buy another product made in China.
Well, there's a whole story about inflation there, Senator, but that's for another day. We got to leave it there. Thank you for your time, and I'll let you get back to work there. Face the Nation will be back in a minute. Stay with us.
Anyone who presents with an atypical case.
Back up, right there.
Good to have you back. You have been on this program warning for some time now that monkeypox was past the point of containment. This week, the Biden administration acknowledged it is a national public health emergency. They added 2 senior advisors to the White House to run point. What difference does it make now? Can they catch up?
Well, look, I think they can still catch up. I think there's the potential to get this back in the box, but it's going to be very difficult at this point. We're continuing to look for cases in the community of men who have sex with men. It's primarily spreading in that community, but there's no question that's spread outside that community at this point, and I think we need to start looking for cases more broadly. We're looking for cases in that community, so we're finding them there, but we need to start looking for cases in the broader community. That means probably testing anyone who presents with an atypical case of shingles or an atypical case of herpes for monkeypox as well. I think we need to broaden testing, and so far CDC's been reluctant to make that recommendation. I think if we're going to contain this and make sure that it doesn't spread more broadly in the population, we need to start testing more broadly. We have the capacity to do it. Right now, CDC has the capacity to conduct about 80,000 tests a week. They're doing about 8,000. So they can broaden this substantially by changing the case definition and recommending that more doctors be testing more patients looking for this infection in the community.
Well, to your point about broader spread, in Illinois, a daycare worker tested positive for monkeypox and exposed children. The FDA are allowing those kids to be vaccinated. Parents about to send their kids back to school. Should they be worried about this now?
Look, I don't think this is something that people need to be generally worried about. I think that probably the incidence of this infection in the broader community is still very low. So your risk of coming into contact with monkeypox is exceedingly low outside of certain social networks where you see a higher case rate. But if we want to contain this, if we want to prevent this from becoming an endemic virus, we need to be looking more widely for it. And the worst case scenario is that we start testing more broadly and we don't find it, and that would be reassuring. But we should be doing that. We should also be testing wastewater for monkeypox. That's something that CDC can turn on instantly, starting to look for monkeypox in wastewater to see if it's spreading in communities and locations, geographic locations, where right now we don't think it's spreading, but it could be.
We don't know what we don't know. On vaccines, we know there is a national shortage. There are 2 doses of this vaccine that are required. HHS and the FDA said on Thursday that they're looking at a dose-sparing approach to stretch out existing supply. How does that work? What does that mean?
Right, so this decision could come as early as this week, and the emergency youth authorization that they could issue it flows from the public health emergency that they declared. So this would be the first practical effect of that public health emergency. What they would do is cut the dose by 1/5, so they'd only give 1/5 of the dose. And instead of injecting it subcutaneously, so below the skin, they inject it intradermally into the skin, so into the top layer of the skin. So think about a test that you get, for example, for tuberculosis, where you used to get an injection under the skin and you'd get a small welt as they injected fluid under the skin. That's an intradermal infection. We know that we inject certain things into the skin in that way. It's very immunogenic. You get a strong immune response, and there's a lot of data that FDA has looked at that was actually collected in the context of trying to prepare for smallpox, a potential outcome with smallpox, where smallpox might be used as a bioterrorist weapon, and how we would extend doses of the smallpox vaccine. What they learned from those studies is transferable to this vaccine for monkeypox, and so they feel very assured that they can generate a strong immunological response by delivering this intradermally, and that would allow them to stretch out the doses of the monkeypox vaccine they have by 5-fold. So instead of having about 800,000 doses, they would have somewhere between 4 and 5 million doses immediately.
But this is essentially an experiment in real time.
Well, we've done it before. I mean, we did it for yellow fever. We've done it for Ebola. We've done these dose-sparing strategies in public health emergencies. It's unfortunate we find ourselves in this position. There's decisions that could have been made earlier where we'd have more doses available, but this is a practical solution to a very immediate public health challenge.
I want to ask you about COVID now. President Biden has tested negative twice now. He's out of isolation. Pfizer makes Paxlovid, the drug that the president took. I know you're on the board of Pfizer, as we say. The White House says just 5 to 10% of cases have these rebounds. But this is a pretty high-profile case. Dr. Fauci had a rebound too. Does this indicate anything about how someone fares long-term from COVID? How do we understand this?
Yeah, well, look, the good news is that the president's feeling well. My understanding is that he didn't experience any new symptoms during this second bout of infectivity. So he was testing positive, but did in fact mount new symptoms. And that's a good sign. I don't think that he's going to have any long-term implications because he had this second course of illness from COVID. We don't know, but I think the president's going to do quite well given what we know about his case. And the White House has been very transparent. You are seeing these cases of rebound, you're right. So far, the data seems to suggest it's about 5% of cases. You also see rebound with the other drugs, and you see it in the setting of natural infection. It's being studied. Pfizer right now, which, as you mentioned, I'm on the board of, is talking to FDA about doing some additional studies on how to approach these cases, whether or not you recourse the therapy or extend the dose, the length of treatment in certain patients. So we don't know how to approach this fully right now. But it's a small percentage of cases where you're seeing this phenomena.
Quickly, CDC is expected to loosen COVID guidelines for schools. Do you favor this?
Look, I think it reflects the reality that more kids have been exposed to this virus. They're not immunologically naive. We want to do more to keep kids in the classroom. And changing attitudes about COVID. I think there are still ways we can keep kids safe in the classrooms, remain vigilant. and lift some of these restrictions that have caused a lot of kids to have to miss school days. So the test to stay strategies, we've turned over a lot of infections that were asymptomatic and forced kids out of the classroom, quarantining kids who are exposed to COVID. I think they can lift those things at this point, and that seems to be where CDC is heading. But still remain vigilant. For example, notifying parents when there's a close contact so parents can keep an eye on their children and get them tested.
All right, Dr. Gottlieb, we'll be watching that. Thank you. We'll be back in a moment. Stay with us.
MetaPortal Go. Look professional.
We turn now to the state of the economy and the president of the San Francisco Federal Reserve Bank, Mary Daly. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
The San Francisco Fed said fiscal spending during the entirety of the pandemic, all the congressional funding, contributed 3%, 3% hike in inflation. Do you expect the congressional bill that's about to pass to add to inflation as well?
Well, let's remember that during the time that there was this fiscal relief during the pandemic, there was also monetary policy relief, and those were things necessary to get us through the pandemic. So that's why that was such an important component, and history will be the judge whether it was too much or too little, but right now that's where that was, and my staff have evaluated that. When I look forward, there are so many things going on in the economy right now, both domestically and globally, and we are struggling with high inflation, but the Fed is committed to bringing that down, and we're looking at not only things that Congress passes, but also what happens across the entire world.
So do you think this bill will add to inflation? Has inflation peaked? Can you say that?
You know, I really can't comment on pending legislation. It's really hard to tell because all the details haven't been worked out yet, and or the time frame in which those things will take place. So right now, I think the most important thing, Margaret, is that inflation is too high, and the labor market is strong. The global economy is struggling with ongoing high inflation, and that's what I'm focused on.
You're a labor economist. We had this surprisingly strong jobs number on Friday. Why was it so surprising? What was it that economists missed here? What was your takeaway?
You know, it's super interesting. You know, it did surprise everyone who tries to figure out exactly what the number will be, and we were, you know, number projections were well off. But you know, frankly, if you're out in the communities, if you're traveling anywhere, you're just going in your own community, I don't think consumers or workers or businesses were that surprised. There's help wanted signs all over the place. People can find multiple jobs if they want them. The search times for jobs aren't that long. So I think the labor market is continuing to deliver. It just tells me that people want to work and that people want to hire. The universal truth is that inflation's too high.
But does it still, does it indicate that recession is not where we are or where we're going?
If you're out in the economy, you don't feel like you're in a recession. That's the bottom line. The most important risk out there is inflation, and I think the job market just confirms that.
Okay, we're going to take a break and come right back with you. Mary Daly, stay with us. We have more questions.
At the pump. I can't do anything with my life because I have to spend everything on gas.
Just taking a lot of food out of my kids' mouth, you know, just to get to work.
That's why Americans for Prosperity is traveling the country, helping people out with an inflation-adjusted discount on their gas. Americans are tired of paying more and getting less.
I just wish Washington will end wasteful spending.
Join us at thetruecostofwashington.com.
Performance. IBM. Let's create.
We'll be right back with a lot more Face the Nation, including more with Mary Daly.
"60 Minutes" tonight on CBS.
Land News, live, local, now.
Welcome back to Face the Nation. We continue our conversation now with the head of the San Francisco Federal Reserve Bank, Mary Daly. In that jobs number on Friday, we also saw that wages rose, but they're not rising as quickly as inflation is. How concerned are you that that shows inflation is really becoming embedded in the economy in a way that is really going to force your colleagues at the Fed to continue to have to hike rates?
You know, I don't see inflation as embedded in the economy, the kinds of things that we would worry about just not being able to correct easily. What I see is supply and demand are just unbalanced. About 50% by my own staff's estimates of the excess inflation we see is related to demand, the other 50% to supply. The Fed is really well positioned to bring demand down, and we already see the cooling forming in the housing market and investment. So I do see signs that the economy's cooling. It just is going to take some time for the interest rate adjustments we've made to work their way through. And we are far from done yet. That's the promise to the American people. We are far from done. We're committed to bringing inflation down, and we'll continue to work until that job is fully done.
So it would still be appropriate to raise rates in September by 0.5%?
Absolutely. And, you know, we need to be data dependent. We need to leave our minds open. We have 2 more inflation reports coming out, another jobs report. We continue to collect all the information from the context we talk to see how this is working its way through the economy. But you mentioned, you know, wage growth a little bit above 5%, inflation last print at 9.1%. Americans are losing ground every day, so the focus has to be on bringing inflation down.
One of the things the Fed can't control is geopolitical risk. How concerned are you about what is happening in the Taiwan Strait right now?
Well, there's so much going on globally, and I think that's really something that we need to think about. It's just getting through COVID, making sure the new variants don't derail economic activity. We have central banks across the globe raising interest rates to try to bridle their own inflation. And we have ongoing developments that take place, you know, geopolitically or just more generally among countries. And all of those things, the war in Ukraine, all of those things create headwinds, if you will, for the U.S. economy. And we're going to have to lean against those headwinds for growth while we bridle inflation.
Fed has its work cut out, and I know we'll be talking again. Thank you very much, Mary Daly. China launched its most dramatic show of military force in decades, with 4 days of war games off the coast of Taiwan, all in response to Speaker Pelosi leading a congressional delegation to the self-governed island last week. Congressman Gregory Meeks, chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, was on that trip. Good morning.
Good morning. Good to be with you.
Well, you have been globe-trotting, but I imagine you'll soon be back in Washington to vote on this big spending bill. It is a big win, potentially, but it's a tenth of the size of the president's original ask. Is what's about to pass and this reduction in gas prices enough to help Democrats win in November?
There's no question this is a big and important bill. It reduces inflation. It makes sure that we can now reduce drug prices. It helps on fighting climate change, and we will be moving forward. That goes on top of wins already made in a bipartisan manner during this Congress, like bipartisan wins in infrastructure, gun control, CHIPS and Science Act, PACT Act for the Veterans Select Committee, the first black woman elected of appointed to be the Supreme Court. So yes, this is a icing on the cake of moving forward of democratic achievements in a bipartisan way in this election year.
But despite all of what you just laid out, I know you know that many polls, including those from CBS, project that Republicans will win the majority in the House. Can you reverse that?
Oh, absolutely. I think that the conversations as we're entering the crucial months of September and October, look, we had an all-time low unemployment rate, and we see a court that is regressive and trying to take away a woman's right to choose. We're fighting and standing for that.
To your trip to Taiwan, we have seen these dramatic Chinese war games in response to this visit. China cut off some of the diplomatic ties with the United States to protest the fact that you went there to Taipei with Speaker Pelosi. Did this trip backfire by undermining some of the Biden administration priorities?
Not at all. Clearly the Biden administration, by his presence there and by increasing economic ties there, is something that shows that the region is very important. And President Biden understands, being a prior member of the Senate, the difference between the executive branch and the legislative branch. And so what we have to do at this time, because it's very clearly a tense moment on the Taiwan Strait, and that's why it's very important that all sides respect the status quo, which we did when we were there, don't resort to force or to change things. And it's just as important that the United States redoubled our economic, cultural, and security cooperation with Taiwan in face of Beijing's aggression. So this was a very appropriate trip at the time for the region. And I think that when we talked to the Taiwanese, they were appreciative of us being there. You should have seen over 250,000 Taiwanese tracked our flight flying in. On the largest building in Taiwan, big sign saying, "We love you, Nancy Pelosi." Mm-hmm. People lining the streets when we were driving to our hotel. So clearly the Taiwanese were very happy.
No
and
doubt.
I tell you, we were, all of our allies, all of our partners and friends in the region and the other nations that we visited was very happy that we were there.
But Beijing was furious. They cut off climate change talks with the United States. They cut other cooperation. And in fact, Beijing said this is the one issue that the U.S. and China, the two most powerful countries in the world, could come into conflict with. Beijing said a visit by the third highest ranking official in the U.S. government on a military aircraft was provocative and sends a strong signal the U.S. is on Taiwan's side. Is the U.S. on Taiwan's side?
We did nothing that was, if you look at provocative, the ones that were sending missiles over Taiwan and trying to encircle the island was, in fact, Beijing. This was nothing unusual. Members of Congress this year have traveled to Taiwan previously. I've traveled to Taiwan a number of times. I've traveled to China. But we're not going to allow, and Speaker Pelosi is absolutely all right about this, that to have President Xi dictate to us where we should or should not go. We are going to stand by our friends, our partners, and our allies, and clearly Taiwan is one of them. And so the being provocative is not us, it's the Beijing government. And we're just not going to allow that to happen.
But in terms of this policy, for decades, it's been one of strategic ambiguity. The U.S. sells arms to Taiwan, but doesn't promise to actually defend it. Do you need to change that? Does Congress need to prepare for?
To China, I'm going to weigh in on this. To China about Taiwan because of the heightened concerns. I'm not saying it's right, but because of the heightened concerns, China seen this as a nanny boo-boo moment for the American government officials to fly over to Taiwan. That's how they basically interpreted this. The bottom line is that China still wants to manipulate, dominate, and derelict its own citizens over there to the degree that they treat them like a herd of animals, like a herd of cows or a herd of horses. There's no doubt when you're dealing with that many people, there has to be certain laws implemented that probably ordinarily you're not going to have to implement in other countries because of their population explosion over there. But by and large, China still operates its government procedures the same as some of the other known communist, socialist controlled countries in the world. A matter of fact, I got a report basically about a year ago that China, because of their massive growth in the past 10 years, and we have no one to blame but ourselves because we have set back and allowed for this to occur, towards them having such a foothold, not only in the necessities that people want or claim that they want or need, but also in the pharmaceutical department. There is at least one person that becomes a millionaire in China every day. Every day is the average that they've been running for people, entrepreneurs, to become wealthy over in China. Now, I don't know how accurate that those figures are. Those was the figures that I got. But even if they're not completely accurate, that still speaks volumes about China and their growth and their successes. They have basically bullied their way into a market that is undeniable towards them taking center stage and a leadership role in. Why America and other political parties throughout the world has tolerated and allowed for this to occur is still to this day a phenomenon beyond anything that I could ever conceive towards being acceptable. Anything that I could conceive towards being acceptable towards this phenomenon that has happened over there. In which, don't get me wrong, I'm all for everybody, the more the merrier, that gets into the marketplace, that can become a contributor to the world's needs, more so than a I'm trying to think of the word, more so than a problem like President Putin right now is doing with the Ukrainians pertaining to the grain and the oil and the fertilizer and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Whenever you get to looking at that from a global perspective, Russia has become no longer an asset to the world's needs, but now are looked upon as being a liability. And I guess that's probably one reason why so many different agencies, regardless of what country that they come from, did not explore a whole lot of investment over in places like Africa. Because if you get to looking at Africa, Africa right now is going through one of their most severest droughts, like two times worse than what it's ever been, to the point that now all their livestock is basically dying. Wildlife is dying because of what happened in Russia. Their prices has now doubled over there pertaining to food, and the warlords over there are going absolutely crazy because they foresee that that's going to be the only way that they're going to be able to survive, is by taking and pillaging from everybody else. It has gotten that bad over in Africa that really and truly a whole lot of media attention has not fallen into that area because of the severeness of the drought over there. I was listening to a minister group just last night pertaining to wells, people digging wells over in that area, that they need to be digging on average 100 wells a day. 100 wells a day to provide enough food and enough water, because without water you don't get food. You know, it takes water to make plants grow, it takes water to feed the livestock, it takes water for people to live. That they need to be drilling 100 wells a day somewhere in Africa. 100 wells a day, if they are going to be a self-sustainable, surviving nation. In other words, they don't need all the other gizmos and gadgets that the majority of all the other nations need right now. You know why? because they are in a survival mode, the same as Cuba, the same as Puerto Rico, the same as some of those other little islands that's been hit, struck by so many hurricanes that has brought so much remorse and hardship into people's lives. Those people don't need toys. They don't need TVs. They don't need rocking chairs. They don't need all the other things that we think that everybody else needs. They need the essentials. Just like the people up in eastern Kentucky that just got through being ruined in about 3 or 4 counties. They don't need comic book strips. They need toilet paper and essentials pertaining to water and food. That's what they need. That's the reason why that a lot of the Red Cross units right now that's going up and working into that area, as well as FEMA, they're backing off towards people bringing used clothes and used furniture and used this and used that, because that is not what their essentials are about right now. Their essentials is about what is it going to take for these people to recover. And the first thing is for the bare necessities pertaining to water and food and toilet paper and medicine and a place to stay cool during the summer, hot heat, and a place to put their lie down in the time of falling weather, regardless whether it's rain or snow or ice. If winter, is on its way. Not too long from now, probably within the next 4 months from now, we'll be seeing temperatures that could actually freeze people to death. So these are all the bare necessities, just like over in Africa. They have bare necessities right now, and it has gotten extremely worse because of the environmental global changes that is happening. And I also contribute a lot of that because of their unwillingness to accept the Lord Jesus Christ into their teachings. And I realize that there's a mighty movement in Africa pertaining to Christianity. There's a mighty movement right now in China pertaining to Christianity. There's a movement, or supposedly a movement, over in Russia that began 30 plus years ago towards Christianity. A matter of fact, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Poisonous Putin says that he's part Jewish and that he's a Christian. They believe in the Bible, they claim that they do. I don't see how anybody can believe in the Bible and be genociding a group of people over there in the 21st century. But, I don't know. Somebody has really done something wrong to cause Goliath to slew David the way that the Russians are doing right now, and the rest of the nation sit idly by and basically tolerate or allow for this to happen. I've never seen anything on this level. I mean, it was bad enough when we went to war with Iraq and Iran and Desert Storm and Desert Shield, and then the Afghanistan war, which I don't think that we never should have gotten embarked in, and even other people believe the same thing, that we never should have gotten embarked in, including one of our prior presidents, which was Mr. Ford, but didn't want those records revealed to the American people until after he was dead, because he could no longer trust his own government pertaining to, if he put that information out there while he was living, he was taking a chance on them hiring assassins to come in and having him killed. His own government, his own president. And don't say that that can't happen or won't happen, because we sat in 1963 and seen one get his brains blown out right in front of us on national TV. So don't think that the gullible and the greedy and the selfish and the mean and the cruel and the indifferent aren't still out there, because I guarantee you they are. Just look at all the persecution that the Windmill Ministries missions has received in the past 30-something years by promoting a message that, yes, was coming out of the book of Revelations, that, yes, was talking about the teachings of Christ pertaining to love and grace and forgiveness, but also the teachings of the book of Revelations as well as Daniel. Look at all the persecution that the founder, which is myself that's speaking to you right now, has received just in the past 30 plus years, knowing good and well that my message surrounded peace and utopia. Look at what happened to one of the leaders of the Beatles that basically sang songs of peace and utopia. And there's been other people that has come forth in mighty, mighty good messages, such as Martin Luther King and other people that have struggled and have played the ultimate price walking out into the eyes of the general public, because the general public right now is bewildered, and the vast majority of them are going in the wrong direction pertaining to righteousness and holiness. It's one thing to preach it, and it's another thing to actually live it. And right now in America, you probably got less than 2% of the people, and those are probably your elders, your senior citizens, because they're not old enough to be able to do no different. But you got probably less than 2 to 3% America that's actually living a righteous, holy lifestyle, either out of choice or because of surrounding circumstances. But you probably got less than about 3% of the American people right now that's actually living that in which what they believe and teach. The rest of them are just playing it nonchalantly, and they think that they're playing God for a fool, and inevitably who they're playing for a fool is themselves, because God is not going to hear, first of all, a sinner's prayer other than a prayer of forgiveness, of please, Father, be merciful unto me, even as a sinner. God will hear that prayer. But whenever it comes to the prayer of protecting our nation, protecting our cities, protecting our communities, whenever it comes to a prayer towards I want a brand new Cadillac and a $500,000 home, and I want this and I want that, I think the American people are soon going to learn that those type of prayers right now have been shut off. Even whenever it comes to the protection coming from the Heavenly Father in regards towards global environmental warming. And the reason why is because God is not a fool. He's not to be played as a fool. You're not to never ever mock God or mock the things of God. And whenever a society starts doing that, that's whenever God the Father will lift the hand off of that society and allow whatever happens to that society to happen, regardless whether it comes in the form of famines, regardless whether it comes in the form of droughts or floods or hurricanes or tornadoes or diseases or war. And those are the things that has basically bombarded the American people's lives just within the past 30 plus years, because once more society went to the left whenever they should have went to the right. Who engineered that? Who influenced that? Who persuaded the American people of going for that? Our American politicians working in the White House that was being influenced by the Luciferian Lucifer himself. While in doing so, they was proclaiming that they was a godly people, and the whole time, instead of going towards the ways of righteousness, they was actually going in the opposite direction. Instead of going in the direction of peace and utopia, they was actually going in the wrong direction. That's the reason why suddenly, all of a sudden, all this stuff has merged. It has been accelerated because of COVID. COVID has brought a lot of this stuff out into the open. It has surfaced now that scientists 25, 30 years ago was saying that these events that we're in right now was not going to happen until long about 20 and 50. So all of this has been an eye-opener for everybody. And to be quite honest with you, I just got off the telephone last night with a minister over in Union City. United Pentecostal minister, Brother Calum. I think it'd be all right to mention his name. And me and him both have come to the same conclusion that our children have not been adapted to this type of technology, that now, whenever they go to school and they're being bullied, or somebody's trying to sissy them out, or somebody is trying to dominate their lives in some sort of way, whenever we was children and we went home, we got to escape that. During the time that we was escaping from that was the time that we could think about it and heal from it. And then go back into it the following next day, and then go through the same rigmarole, and then the next day, and then the next day, until we finally become aware of the surroundings of that in which what was happening on a maturity level to the point that then we could accept and understand the things that was happening in our lives as a child. That way we could have either avoided them or prevented them to happening. Today, children don't have that option. Today, whenever children go home, their smartphones or their laptop tablets or whatever that they're working with in school goes home with them. That means that the same ragging, the same badgering, the same bulliness, the same intimidation, infuriation, the same embarrassment, not only is at school now, but it's also at home. So inevitably they can't escape it. And because they can't escape it, and because our children has not been adapted to this type of atmosphere on a maturity level, they can't handle it, and that's the very thing that is causing a great deal of our children to commit suicide right now, in which the suicide rate today is higher than it's ever been. Just like the suicide rate on this particular day, which is August the 7th, in honor of the Purple Heart Memorial Fund and the Purple Heart Memorial movement that began, I think, all the way back in the Hoover days, or maybe even before, that on this particular day, we are still losing 20 plus veterans a day that are committing suicide, that are taking their own lives. And to me, that is absolutely horrifying to know that our nation, that used to be the strongest nation in the world, is now diminishing itself in these priorities that obviously the American people overseen or didn't care about. And that's one of the reasons why the homeless is as bad as what the homeless is out in San Francisco, California, and Los Angeles, and Orange City, and all these other different places throughout all these other big metropolitan areas. That's one reason why, is because we failed the very people that was trying to take care of us. We failed to take care of them. And whenever you do this, it is a slap in the face. It's basically an abomination to the United States military forces, of the first responders on down. Whenever you do this, it's a slap in their face, and believe it or not, you can take it for what it's worth. It becomes a very, very dangerous state for a nation to be in whenever, first of all, you're not taking care of your priorities the way that you should be pertaining to your veterans, your military. And number two, whenever you have taken your eye off the ball in prioritizing things that should have come first, but now you're prioritizing other things to entertain the world with, such as big coliseums to be able to play ball or do whatever in. Whenever you take your eye off the ball to the degree that this nation has done, then you have severe problems that is resonating and only exacerbating on a day-to-day level. It is extremely sad because a certain group of people, and I put the blame off on the boomers, the baby boomers, basically those that was born after World War II, up until I think they end the baby boomer era somewhere off in either the late 50s or the early 60s. I don't know. I was born in 1961. I may be on the tail end of the baby boomers, but I know that I punch at them quite a bit because it was that society that put everything on autopilot, or they put it on cruise control, hoping that the people that we was paying them the money was taking care of these problems, and come to find out they wasn't taking care of the problems. That's one of the reasons why we're in the shape that we're in today, is because too many people had taken their eye off of the ball and nobody was micromanaging our politicians, either federally or on a state level or on a county level. And whenever you are not watchdogging, whistleblowing these entities, and you walk away from them, I guarantee you the characteristics of humanity is going to intrigue them to the degree that whenever they come out of office, like Dick Cheney, he was valued at 400 times more or more than that what he ever thought about being whenever he went in towards being vice president for the young Bush administration. I think whenever he went in, he was valued at about $3 million. Whenever he left, he was valued at about $400 million. And that was in an 8-year tenure. So you can't tell me that the politicians coming out of that era have not taken advantage of the situation to the point of feeding their own pockets while they was starving the American people. More interested in building coliseums than it was towards wanting to take care of our veterans. More interested in building $400 and $500 million coliseums than it was towards taking care of drug control problems or the immigrant problem of the illegal immigrants coming over to America. And they're not just coming in over in the Rio Grande, over the Rio Grande down toward Texas and New Mexico and Arizona and California. They're coming in everywhere. They're coming in from Cuba. They're coming in from North Maine. They're coming in from Canada. They're coming in from Washington State. Matter of fact, whenever you go to Washington State, you'll find more Russian immigrants there than you will anywhere else in the country. Just like whenever you go to Florida, you'll find more Cuban immigrants than you will in any part of the country. Just like if you go to Texas or New Mexico or Arizona, you'll find more Mexican immigrants there than you will in any part of the country. Why is this? It's because they're going to settle in at the closest spot that they can say once they come into America and they know that they have a footing in America. They'll basically lunge into America, but they'll settle in the closest place that they can settle at ordinarily. Now, there's a few that want to go to different places, and they usually eventually do so, but by and large, wherever the problem is coming in, and we still have people, don't think for a second that we don't, that's coming in illegally over on the East Coast pertaining to Ireland and Iceland and some of those other northern areas coming through Spain and Portugal and Germany and England and all them other places. Don't think for a second that it's only just the southern border. The southern border is the worst. And that's the reason why people focus in on the southern border. But the bottom line is this: we have illegal immigrants coming over to America every day, somewhere in and on our borders. And that's a fact. But you ain't going to hear the media talk about that too often because the numbers are too low. It's kind of like death occurrences now. You know, where whenever somebody stabs somebody or done a horrendous crime, ordinarily you heard about it the next day or within hours after it happened. Now it's got to the point that if a killer don't kill at least 4, 5, 8, 10, 12, 15, 25 people, it don't even catch the hot topic news for the day because it wasn't a big enough event. Talk about becoming calloused. Wow. Did the boomers ever callous the generation that's growing right now to the degree that we're just supposed to take it nonchalantly and not think a thing about it?
Prepare for a Chinese invasion of Taiwan.
If the Chinese invades Taiwan, they're going to be cutting their own noses off to despite their face because they get something like 70% of all their digital technical software from that island. They get a great deal of assets coming from Taiwan. Period. They would love to be able to go in there and basically rule them out or run them out, but they're not going to be run out. They're going to be just like the Ukrainians. They're not going nowhere. And you know what? I really don't blame the people in Taiwan, because they had to fight for their independence, just like the people in Ukraine had to fight for theirs, and just like America had to fight for hers back during the Revolutionary War, in which, if the people over in China are ever going to be able to have the same type of freedoms like Americans do, they're going to have to fight their own authority powers within their own boundaries towards doing the same, even if it leads into a civil war. The same way with the Russian citizens. You know, it's not the Russian citizens that are attacking the Ukrainians. It's the Russian government. Well, until the Russian citizens become overwhelmed with all this to the degree that they're willing to do something about it, it's going to have to take a movement from within to get Poisonous Putin and his ideologies out, pertaining to how that they treat their citizens. It's the same way with the people in Mexico. Instead of the people in Mexico running for the border, the people in Mexico should be planning on overthrowing their own government. The same way in Honduras, the same way in all those other foreign countries that goes into South America. If the people does not rise up against their own officials in smothering them out to the degree that they're basically being treated like a bunch of cows or a bunch of horses, they're a bunch of livestock. If the people does not rise up against those things are going to continue to happen. And I'm going to give you one final analogy pertaining to all of that. We went over to Afghanistan primarily because we was pointing our finger at 9/11 towards them being the perpetrators, and probably some of those terrorists over there may have actually been involved, or at least independently or indirectly probably was in some degree of 9/11. But whenever it comes to the masterminding of 9/11, that did not occur in Afghanistan. But my point being is that we went to Afghanistan and we committed over 20 years, and we sacrificed life after life after life of our American soldier. We taught them what was right and what was good in the eyes of the Western world, and we gave them artillery and weaponry to be able to defend themselves, and we walked away from the situation, and less than 11 days later, the very people that they supposedly hated, that we was at war with, took back over their initial country. So in actuality, whenever the children and the women, in which, don't think for a second that I don't feel for them, because I do, whenever they get recorded and some of their messages or some of their testimonies comes over here to America towards how that they're being abused, and how that their children are being abused, and how the women are being raped, and they don't have no rights, and they don't have no rights to vote, and they don't have no rights to do this, and don't have no rights to that. Who do they have to blame? It's not the Americans. The Americans went over there with the concept to reform them people and to get them off of one lifestyle onto another. Well, after 11 days, whenever the Taliban takes back over the country, proof is in the pudding towards whose fault that it actually falls upon. Who does it fall upon? It falls upon to their own citizens that wasn't willing to fight up against that type of tyranny to begin with. That's my whole point about China or Russia or Honduras or Cuba or any of these other known oligarch tyranny type countries that want to dominate their citizens the way that they're dominating them right now. And until the people stand up against this, their own people, on an internal fashion, it's never going to change. We can put out all that we want to put out there towards this is how that we do it, and this is why that we do it, but it's going to go in one ear and out the other. In other words, it ain't going to have no good, grand, positive effect. Now, there's no doubt that it was over in the Europe area, over in the England area, that manifested or manufactured this type of ideal towards voting in, voting out, our laws, our courts, etc., etc. There's no doubt that we picked up those original ideals and institutionalized them into our own way of living here. But that has spread to the degree that there now are, if I'm not mistaken, it's over 70 countries. Some of them are very small, but it's over 70 plus countries, maybe 90 countries out of 198 or whatever it is countries that have now been willing to adopt those same ways of democracy and become a Republican state to the degree that now they vote in and out their politicians at will. Now, some people are going to say, well, isn't China a diplomatic country? China wants to put itself on the eyes of the global eye towards looking like it is a global society, towards voting in and out their politicians, the same way with Russia. But they have got it so cornered pertaining to the oligarchs and the rich and the mighty and the powerful, to the point that their own citizens basically don't stand a chance in voting something like that out, in voting something like that in, because there's too many of them and they're too powerful. The only way that they're going to be able to succeed in that is to do just exactly like the American people did during the Revolutionary War, and they're going to have to stand up from the inside to go up against this type of tyranny. And if not, they're going to continue to be ruled just like the Afghanistan people, their men, women, and children, which it's very, very sad to think that we dedicated over 20 years, and to get such of a bad bang for our buck is actually an embarrassment. It's shameful and it's disgraceful in how that they thought that they was going to be able to obscure, overlook, underestimate God and God's people towards what went on in 1989. And this is the results because of it. Along with the $30 trillion, along with our jails being full, along with our infrastructure failing, along with all the other headaches that's come about in the past few years, that now suddenly COVID has accelerated to the top of the deal, to the point that now we're looking and analyzing everything. Like I said a while ago, a lot of this information has actually been overwhelming to me. There's been times that I had to sit down and say, you know what, I'm going to have to quit this for a while because it's too strenuous. You know, I've done all my life for the past 55 years in working a physical lifestyle, in working with my hands or working with my arms or working with my legs or all the above, in doing things in a talented, craftful type way. You know, you can craft working on automobiles, you can craft working in construction, you can craft doing other things. Well, I never chose to craft the things that was going to require a great deal of reading and thinking and debating in my own mind towards right and wrong, becoming educational, because I was poor in those educational skills growing up because of the surrounding circumstances in my life. Now, at the age of 55, I've been able to dedicate more time in studying, reading, analyzing, looking up various things on Google. Basically, Google has become my encyclopedia and my dictionary, and I have expanded, I have grown, I have matured, mentally speaking. But has it been hard? Heck yeah. You're talking about a farm boy that couldn't even hardly read that good whenever he wound up being a dropout in, I think, either the 9th grade or the 10th grade. I think it was the 9th grade, but it may have been the 10th grade. I may have went through 1 year in Westview, I don't know. I'm sure there's records somewhere that can verify it one way or the other. But the bottom line is this: I was not a good thinker. I was not a good reader. I was not educated. I wasn't using my mind. And because I wasn't using my mind, I knew that whenever I become a dropout, that I was going to have to be skillful in other areas, in which I did. I was building houses. I went from building houses to building high rises in hanging steel. Just so happens complications arose in my life, and I wound up having a bad accident that basically took me about 2 years to learn to walk again, took another 2 to 5 years for me to be able to handle myself again. And that's whenever I picked up a brand new physical occupation towards being an auto body technician, working on cars. And I was self-sustainable with that career for 35 plus years, which I don't think is a bad rep in regards towards me doing that, because I know a lot of people that if they would have broke both legs, crushed both ankles, crushed 3 vertebrae, ruptured 2 discs, and broke both arms, they would have basically become a rocking chair invalid for the rest of their lives, and they would have survived off of the disability Social Security administration for the rest of their lives. In the meantime, they would have been ducking and dodging, and they would have been trying to make a buck over here, and they would have had to worry about somebody turning them in towards stopping some of their benefits, and it would have been a relentless cycle of peekaboo, I gotcha, I'm getting away with this, etc., etc. I didn't want to live that lifestyle. That's whenever I decided to pull my bootstraps up after going out to Texas and then California for a while in 1982. And whenever I come back, my mind was set that I'm fixing to be self-sustainable again towards no longer drawing a disability check to feed me and to take care of me. So by and large, I feel like I should actually be rewarded for my endeavors rather than being attacked again and again and again right here in my own community, especially Kenton and Sharon and Obion County and Weakley County, and places in Kentucky and places down in Atlanta and places over in Oklahoma City. I think that I should be commended towards being a good United States citizen, pertaining to how that God has gifted me towards getting back on my feet and going again, rather than me being a liability to the system. And why people can't see that, including coming from my very own only biological son that has recently been transferred out of Memphis over into another part of the state of Alabama, in which I'd rather not disclose where he is in Alabama. But the fact of the matter is, I feel like that I've done pretty daggum good for a person that was abused all his life by a military World War II post-traumatic stress disorder person that turned his back on God and become very, very mean and cruel to his family, not just myself, but the family, and demonstrated those angers and demonstrated those abusivenesses openly right here in Weakley County and Obion County, because of the people at the time didn't give a you-know-what. Or they was frightened to death, afraid that if they would have spoke up against that type of aggression, that then they would have been punished for doing the right thing. Which basically speaks volumes about that type of group of people pertaining to the boomers that allowed for such intolerable differences to happen to a family that obviously they didn't care enough about the children to even pick up a phone and remain unanimous in the phone call and at least turn my father in pertaining to the aggression, abusive behavior that he was performing on his family openly in Hopin, Cydonia, Sharon, Kenton, Martin, Dresden, Union City, Rutherford, New Bern, Mason Hall, Medina, over towards Jackson, Tennessee. I had to fill paperwork out on him one time because he come down here to Jackson, Tennessee whenever I was working for a collision specialist and living in Madison County. I still got the records of it. I can prove it if you don't believe me, that I actually had to fill out paperwork on my father whenever I had moved. My wife and I had moved from Milan, Tennessee to Jackson, Tennessee, because he was going to come down there with a baseball bat and supposedly knock my head off my shoulders. So he was very abusive. And he got away with those abusivenesses up until a certain point, until my mother finally decided to trash him by divorcing him. And whenever I reached the age of 15 and a half or 16, whatever it was, my mother signed for a workers release program for me to be able to work just like anybody else, and she signed it, and that's whenever I got away from the craziness that was happening at Route 1, Sharon, Tennessee, over in the old home place, which is less than a quarter of a mile from where I'm living at right now. Matter of fact, my father was so abusive, he even abused his mother. He abused certain people around here, the way that he screamed and yelled at them, and the way that he wanted to take control over children's lives and basically treat those children just like he treated his own. And why the people didn't rise up against that type of aggression in this area, I don't know, but those people will give an account towards what that they didn't do that they should have done. That's on a completely different level than what I'm talking about now. Let's go back to this and let's listen to this real carefully pertaining to Face the Nation.
What we have done, and I think that what we have shown we will do, is to give, and we have given in that policy, defensive weapons to Taiwan. Ultimately,
but we didn't give them to Taiwan to start a third world war. But what we gave them to Taiwan for was to take care of themselves in case of a bully type action that occurred like it's occurring now, or soon to occur, or at least acting like that it might occur, pertaining to China and Taiwan. You know, that was the whole initiative basically that kept Ukraine from being attacked by poisonous Putin, was that Ukraine had sustainable missiles at one time up until 2014, that if anybody messed with them, there was going to be severe nuclear consequences on messing with Ukraine. But our officials talked Ukraine out of all that, and they dismantled their nuclear silo systems. And now we're committed, and others are committed, of helping Ukraine. It looks like a Potsy war that we're fighting on the sidelines, but the bottom line is this: we're not fighting so much against Russia as we are fighting with Ukraine, pertaining to the democracy that the Ukrainian people has asked for and demanded to get, which is just the very opposite towards what happened in Afghanistan. If the people in Afghanistan would have been willing to have fought the Taliban and it had turned into a bloodbath, I'm pretty sure that the American government, after realizing that the Afghanistan people are really wanting to be able to govern their own lives, and now they're being dictated to by this bully called the Taliban, I'm pretty sure that we would have probably come to their aid too as well. But the way it stands now, they're on their own. And why are they on their own? Because their own people did not stand up against the tyranny towards ruling and dominating their lives. And now their lives is being dominated, and now they're screaming and yelling, and they're wanting to blame it on somebody other than themselves, other than their own men that wouldn't stand up for their own women and their own children. Now they're wanting to blame the Americans, and it's not the Americans' fault towards the ordeal that happened in Afghanistan. It's their own. That's the point that I try to make with other tyranny oligarch type countries or socialist type countries, that unless you're willing to do this yourselves, you're going to continue to expect the same thing again and again. I think that's one of the things that they teach you in Alcohol Anonymous, I've never been mandated to go to an Alcohol Anonymous class, but I have ventured off into one or two of them before, just to see what their policies was and how that they structured themselves. But one of their theories of insanity coming from Alcohol Anonymous is that if you continue to do the same thing and you expect different results by doing the same thing, that is a form of insanity. Because unless you're willing to do something different with your life pertaining to the addiction that you're on regarding alcoholism or drug addiction, either or, both is just as bad, unless you're willing to do something with your life towards making changes and doing things differently than what you did before, you can expect the same results. And if you expect anything any different, you are in a mental state of insanity, is the way that most of the Alcohol Anonymous classes teach, the way that I have interpreted some of their teachings.
This should be decided by people sitting down, and not China, and not Beijing, and not Xi continue his provocative actions. It is his provocative actions that is trying to change the status quo. What we need at this time is the status quo to remain as is. And that is the best way to reduce tensions, not the provocations that are being put on by Beijing.
Congressman Meeks, thank you for your time this morning. We'll be right back.
See what happens whenever a country or a nation is as great and as powerful as America is or was, and as far as I'm concerned still is. But see what happens whenever you go to lying and cheating and doing the wrong thing. I use the analogy of the car analogy, that if you are an auto body technician and you're going to repair a car that's been sideswiped down the side, and you're replacing both doors, you're replacing the rear quarter panel, you're replacing the bumper, and it's done damage on either or all three pillars, that after you get through pulling things out the way that it's supposed to be pulled out, and you start putting on panels that are not bolt-on panels but weld-on panels, if you do not hang the doors and get the doors lined up properly within 3 millimeters, which is only the thickness of 3 dimes, if you don't get the doors to where they'll open and shut properly before you ever weld the quarter panel in, odds are you're going to have to cheat on the doors. The doors will never open and shut properly. And once you cheat on the quarter panel, then you got to cheat on the rear door, then you got to cheat on the front door, then you got to cheat on the front fender of the car, which is going to have create more problems pertaining to your grill and your headlights and the way that your hood shuts towards everything lining up. In other words, once you start telling one lie, you're going to have to start telling another lie to cover up that lie, and then you'll have to tell another lie to cover up the first 2 lies. In other words, it becomes into an endless circle, an endless cycle. And that's what America has done in the Reagan and Bush, Walter Bush Sr., H. Bush Sr.'s administration. That's what happened, and that is what has put us where we are today. Period. Absolutely, period.
It's right for you.
Period.
On Friday, I sat down with Taiwan's representative to the U.S., Xiao B. Kim, for the CBS Evening News. Here's more of our interview. President Biden indicated the military wasn't enthusiastic about Speaker Pelosi visiting. She spoke openly about the risk of her plane being shot down. Did Taiwan ever have that level of concern that there was a risk here?
We have been living under the threat from China for decades. And we cannot let their ongoing threats define our desire to make friends internationally. If you have a kid being bullied at school, you don't say you don't go to school. You try to find a way to deal with the bully. And that's exactly what Taiwan is doing, working on making our society stronger and more resilient, fortifying our defenses so that we have means of managing risks. The risks are not posed by Taiwan, nor are they posed by the United States. The risks are posed by Beijing.
What specifically is that risk? Is it a full-scale invasion?
Well, the Chinese have not renounced the use of force. They have been intensifying threats towards Taiwan. That is not only on a military level, it has involved a hybrid toolkit of public disinformation, cyber attacks, economic coercion. They have a broad toolkit that we have become more and more accustomed to. But again, that is not going to change our determination to defend our freedom.
Well, what's happening right now is unprecedented. Beijing has sent 68 warplanes, 13 warships right off your coast. Do you believe that this is just a drill?
Well, indeed, China's behavior is unprecedented, and from the scope and the actions, it appears that they have been preparing for this for some time, way before Speaker Pelosi decided to visit Taiwan.
China is seemingly showing that it can blockade Taiwan, that it can cut you off from the rest of the world. What is the cost of doing something like that?
Well, China has been building up their military capacities rapidly over recent years. And what they are doing through these exercises has the potential of jeopardizing some of the most important air and sea commercial routes. I believe they will also jeopardize China's interest in a stable environment under which trade and commerce can function. Such risky and dangerous behavior has implications for the world.
Do you have any assurances from the Biden White House that they would defend you? Not just sell you weapons, as presidents have for the past 40 years, but actually come to your defense?
We have a very strong security partnership that ensures the protection of our shared interests in the regional peace and stability.
Do you believe the timeline for an invasion is moving up? The criticism of what Speaker Pelosi did by visiting is that she is provoking China.
Well, I think the word provocation has only one place, and that's with China right now. They are the ones that are provoking regional instability.
So you do not think that this was a mistake and that this visit has backfired?
Well, the visit has been welcomed by the Taiwanese people. Sometimes it's hard for other countries from afar to fully understand the feelings and perspectives of the Taiwanese people, and that is for too long, we have been bullied, isolated, and suppressed, and banned from international organizations. So when friends come from afar and wish to lend their support to Taiwan, we generally take that with gratitude.
When you talk to Biden administration officials, they will say, Xi Jinping, the president of China, is taking notes. He is watching what Vladimir Putin is doing right now in Ukraine as a test case to see what he can get away with in Taiwan. What lesson do you think he's learning right now?
I think we are all learning lessons, and the Taiwanese people are also learning lessons, and we are learning that we have to be better prepared. We have to be stronger in our own self-defenses. We have to work hard to galvanize international support in working to deter that tragic scenario from ever happening.
Are you concerned that the West won't stand by Taiwan the way it has stood by Ukraine? China is financially so powerful, it would be hard for the West to cut it off.
Well, I think that was one of the messages that Speaker Pelosi was trying to convey, and that is, despite all challenges, we have friends in the international community who will stand with us.
And lastly, China has also flexed its diplomatic muscles. It cut off a number of agreements, it says, with the United States because of this visit, including collaboration on climate change. Are you concerned that the West will look at this and say, it's not worth it? Not just on climate change, but on other priorities that outrank Taiwan?
Well, are we concerned? Yes, we are concerned about the disruption of these very important discussions on global issues that are matters of interest to not only the United States, but to China and everyone in the world. But the fact is, again, congressional visits to Taiwan have been ongoing for decades. And for decades, it hasn't prevented the United States and China from having constructive discussions on matters of mutual interest. And I agree with some of the U.S. White House and other statements and the analyses that the Beijing government is currently trying to manufacture a crisis over a practice that has been ongoing for decades, and they are using this as a pretext. And I think we have to make that clear. If China is to evolve as a responsible stakeholder in the global community, it's really up to Beijing to decide if their rejuvenation, if China's rejuvenation will evolve with international respect or with international condemnation.
Our full conversation is on our website and YouTube channel. We'll be back in a moment.
We are so excited, we just can't hide it.
It's really, really discouraging to see how that these superpowers are responding and reacting right now towards old grudges that they've had either with Taiwan or with Ukraine. And some has asked the question, well, after Russia gets through with Ukraine, what other area that at one time the old Yugoslavia government used to dominate and control, what country is next? And that is one of the things that has moved, I think it was Sweden and some other country, towards joining up with the UN, is because it's very obvious that these superpowers that are acting this way is violating all Geneva as well as international agreements in a global society functioning the way that a global society should function. And anytime you have this much irregularities from those original agreements, you're going to have the possibility of not just war, but nuclear war. And it's really, really sad, because the bottom line is that diplomacy and peace and utopia is always better than war. I don't know what anybody sees in glorifying themselves in watching somebody be beheaded or a person's life get destroyed over the initial principles of war. They're warmongering. That's what they're doing. They're warmongering. They're warmongering at the expense of a global, at one time stable, self-sustainable society.
Who voted to impeach former President Trump following the attack on the Capitol. Last Tuesday, he lost his primary race against a Trump-endorsed challenger. Congressman Meyer is with us this morning from Grand Rapids, Michigan. Good morning to you, Congressman. The person who won that primary is an election denier named John Gibbs, and he is backed by former President Trump. Why do you think Michigan Republicans favored him?
Well, good morning, Margaret. And as you said, I lost my primary, and that is on me. I take responsibility for that. But it's important to note that it wasn't just former President Trump who was in this race. There was about $500,000 that the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, in their first expenditures of the 2022 midterms, dumped in to help boost him. So we had a scenario where not only did I have the former president aligned against me, but in a rare showing of bipartisan unity, Nancy Pelosi and the House Democratic Campaign Committee also united to try to knock me off the ballot. Now this just highlights the cynicism and hypocrisy of our politics today, And frankly, it'll be unknowable what that ultimate impact was. But the fact that we have the establishment left and the extreme right locking arms in common cause paints a very telling picture of where our politics are in 2022.
Right. What you're talking about there is an ad that the Democratic Congressional Committee campaign spent $325,000 on to boost Mr. Gibbs, which was almost as much as Gibbs spent on his entire campaign. That's what you're referring to. That's what our viewers are looking at right there. But do you think that ad really made a difference? I mean, Democrats aren't voting in this primary, it's Republicans. Why did Michigan Republicans fall for this ad?
Well, I think there is a clear question of agency here, of course. And at the end of the day, Republican voters are going to cast their votes as they see fit. I should note that this ad was not aimed at, was not playing on MSNBC. It was not playing in places where Democratic voters might see it. It was targeted in places to try to sway and convince Republican primary voters to try to give my primary challenger a boost up and over. And I should add that my defeat was by roughly 3%. Out of over 100,000 votes cast, we lost by less than 4,000 votes. And I think that's important to remember when you have very close elections like this, and obviously competing against very strong headwinds, having a Trump-endorsed challenger in a party where President Trump still holds over 75% approval, that a message of focusing on the substance of what I've been able to accomplish in office. I'm proud that our office is on track to set a record for the most number of bills signed into law by a freshman, that those type of accomplishments get lost in our current personality politics, get lost in a broader sense. And I think that is one of the fundamental challenges that we have as a country, and that is, frankly, frustrating Michigan families. That we are dealing with a politics that does not reward substance, that does not reward, reality, but that focuses on rhetoric and personality above all else.
Do you think Democrats are going to get what they paid for here, right? I mean, they're betting that it would be easier to defeat Mr. Gibbs than you. Is your district going to go to a Democrat?
And it's important to note this is a district that President Biden won in 2020 by roughly 9 points. I was one of 5 Republicans running for re-election in seats where President Biden won in the 2020 elections by 8 or more points. And so while I think there is certainly a cynical calculus at play with the Democrats meddling, this is a risky strategy. It's a dangerous strategy. Where President Biden is in his approval is so in the gutter that it is hard to see that strategy. It is easy to see that strategy backfiring in a spectacular way, which is all the more reason why we should not be embracing this zero-sum idea of politics. We should not be embracing this notion that if we can keep a problem alive, keep it festering, but be able to gain a marginal advantage in the process, that somehow equates to a victory. I think it's a dark and cynical way of viewing our politics that, frankly, 48% of the electorate in the primary here rejected. They stood against that cynicism, that they were focused on somebody who is working to deliver results.
Exactly. In other words, they're more committed in beating their component than they are committed towards working for the people to be able to have a solution to the problems. I agree with what he just said.
Your Republican colleague, Liz Cheney, is about to face a primary August the 16th in her state. Former Vice President Dick Cheney, her father, released this video.
In our nation's 246-year history, there has never been an individual who is a greater threat to our republic than Donald Trump. He tried to steal the last election using lies and violence to keep himself in power after the voters had rejected him. He is a coward. A real man wouldn't lie to his supporters. He lost his election, and he lost big. I know it, he knows it, and deep down, I think most Republicans know it.
Is Mr. Cheney right there? Because 57% of Republicans told CBS News they're more likely to vote for a candidate who gets an endorsement from the former president. Is the former president the leader of the Republican Party or the biggest threat to our nation's republic?
Well, I certainly think that President Trump wants to keep those numbers up. He wants that degree of influence. And I mentioned earlier the common cause between the extremes on the right and the establishment left. Nancy Pelosi, I think she's waking up every day crossing her fingers that Donald Trump runs in 2024 that he announces well ahead of the midterms, because right now the midterms are set to be a referendum on President Biden's leadership, and Speaker Pelosi and many of my House Democratic colleagues do not want that. They want it to be a referendum on former President Trump, and I think former President Trump wants that as well.
Well, we will be watching that primary, and Congressman, thank you for joining us today. We'll be right back.
I want to stop right there and say this. First of all, I've never liked Dick Cheney towards what he done in behind the American people's back with Halliburton and doing what they done down in one of the most severe natural catastrophes that has hit America in the past 100 years pertaining to Katrina. In addition to what they was doing as far as blackballing the American people, by every time our United States military would blow up something, here would come Dick Cheney, they'd build it back. I don't understand that theory. I don't go along with that theory, and I don't understand that theory, and as far as I'm concerned, there's no difference in a thug out here on the streets than it is the man that just got through saying what he said about Donald Trump. I do agree with what he did say, that Donald Trump is in fact a threat to our republic. Which leads me to this final analogy that I thought about yesterday whenever the talk show host got fined something like $45 million in putting out misinformation by saying that the Sandy Hook shooting was a hoax. The Sandy Hook shooting was a hoax. The Sandy Hook shooting was a hoax. It's based around freedom of speech, which was the very thing that I was attacked at and on here in Weakley County, Tennessee, and Martin, Tennessee in 2005, whenever I was talking to a convenience store teller and told him that there was going to be an explosion of controversy happen in my life and that I was liable to wind up on the Channel 6 News. Those people, the law enforcement people here in Weakley County, took that information out of perspective, and the next thing you know, they tried to make me out to be some sort of a potential homegrown terrorist that led to the disasters that happened in my life up in Kentucky, that also led into the disasters that happened in my life in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, and almost led into the disasters that happened to me in Atlanta, Georgia, after distributing a cassette tape to their governor at that time that was begging for people to pray for rain because of the humanitarian catastrophes that was soon to boil over if Atlanta didn't have adequate water to feed their people. It would have been absolutely horrendous on every level imaginable. But my question is this: if we'll hold a talk show host, and I forgot his name now, I should know his name. If somebody mentioned it, I'd know it right off the bat that if it was the right name. If somebody will hold him accountable of paying back a family or families of $45 million, in addition to another $2 or $3 million that he was told to pay from the courts, if they will hold him accountable for putting out false information to his viewers and basically making money off of it and using the lives of, I think it was almost 30 children, young children, kindergarten children, of their deaths, of telling people that it was a hoax. If we as a society will hold people like that accountable, how come we won't hold Donald Trump accountable after he realized and knew without a shadow of a doubt that the Democrat Party actually did win? They won in all the states that the Democrat Party said that they had won, even though Donald Trump was challenging those decisions. Every one of the courts that I believe that I've heard of had won over Donald Trump's challenging those results. So how come our courts don't hold somebody like Donald Trump accountable for spewing out false information that led into the January 6th deal, the same as they had the talk show host, I think his name, Alex Jones maybe, something like that. How come they don't hold him as accountable as they do that individual? Or I'm going to use another scenario that happened with a rapper, I don't forget his name, that was down in Texas a year or so ago, maybe 2 or 3 years, but there was rioting going on in the audience, that at night, because of all the smoke and all the other bright lights, the entertainer that was working that night did not see the things that was going on because of the mass confusion. And even after somebody brought it to his attention that rioting was breaking out, he still refused to quit performing in front of his audience while people was being stomped to death. And I don't forgot now how many people it was that died. I think it was on up there around 9 or 10 or 15 or something like that, people that basically died because they was stomped to death of a stampede. Whenever you get around that many people, it's dangerous, especially if something out of the ordinary happens, and obviously something out of the ordinary happened that night. If they're going to hold that guy accountable and responsible towards lawsuits with this rapper, how come they don't hold Donald Trump accountable? I realize that the presidency pertaining to being the President of the United States has certain perks that most other independent agencies or entities don't have, pertaining to executive privileges. But executive privileges should only go so far, especially whenever it comes to bringing harm and hurt, danger and destruction to his own people. Now we're talking about high treason, because the whole primary purpose for hiring these people and putting them in the positions that we put them in is to bring a self-sustainable, productive, independent self-society into order, to have peace and utopia to a certain degree in that order. And whenever a politician fails to do that, he has failed his oath. He has failed that in which what he promised to do with the American people towards providing this type of services, and also not compromising the Constitution towards freedom of speech and freedom of religion. Donald Trump went beyond that step of freedom of speech to the degree that he kept telling his audience or his viewers, his followers, that he had won the election, that they had won the election, and that everybody else was lying. And the whole time, the big lie was the very perpetrator that was accusing everybody else of lying, which was Donald Trump. So how come that man don't get held accountable the same as the rapper, or the same as Alex Jones? I think it's the guy's name, the talk show host that now just got through getting fined something like $46 or $47 million. And I'm pretty sure that ain't the end yet of the penalties and what he has stirred up, because if the Justice Department can prove that he had anything to do with stirring up the Proud Boys and MS-13 and some of the other gangs that was involved in January the 6th, they'll probably hold Alex Jones even liable for some of that stuff too as well. So, in other words, this could go from a civil crime to a judicial crime, to the point of Alex Jones actually going to jail and never being able to speak on live public radio the rest of his entire life. How come they don't hold other individuals that mislead or misguide, that abuse their First Amendment right, freedom of speech, how come they don't hold Donald Trump accountable? You do the math. The whole thing has turned into a fiasco pertaining to our laws and our orders and our courts, beginning with the Supreme Court and all the above. And whenever you have a society that is being ruled this way, run this way, and the people has lost interest in that government because of the lies, because of the manipulation that has happened in the past, you have a very, very dangerous situation that is brewing, that could explode into something like we could never ever even begin to imagine. And it could be stemmed from the deal happening right now in China, pertaining to Nancy Pelosi going to that little island, Taiwan, or it could even be stemmed from what's occurring right now with the Ukrainians over in Russia, or it could be stemmed from possibly another ordeal turning out to be something big over in Iran pertaining to Jerusalem and all the fighting going on in the Middle East. Either or is a tinderbox just waiting to explode, and if it does, it could turn into something 1,000 times worse than what we ever thought about towards what's happening with the grain and the fertilizer over in Ukraine. So yes, from a safety conscientious standpoint, I believe that these things need to be looked at and dealt with appropriately. And I think whenever it comes to a national security interest, that this could possibly be one of the most dangerous times and dangerous eras that we have ever lived in, other than the attack of Pearl Harbor and the attack on 9/11. It could actually evolve into something of a perfect storm towards catastrophic, apocalyptic catastrophe. Catastrophic, apocalyptic catastrophes. I'll get the word right in a minute. Just takes me a while to think about it. So as we listen to some more of this, please let's keep in mind that Google is aware of these things, and if Google is aware of these things that are occurring, I guarantee you that a lot of these other independent little countries, as well as the superpowers, are very aware of these things occurring too as well. Talk about walking a tight wire, talking about a balance here between order and disorder. I don't think we've ever come this close as a Republican democracy. A republic democracy. I don't think that we've ever come this close as a republic democracy towards seeing things unravel the way that we are today. And it's kind of scary, really. It's really kind of scary.
Back home is here at Cotton Point Living Center. When someone gets hurt and needs help rehabbing, our professional staff.
Well, it's hard for me to find the last part of Face the Nation.
The stories we've never seen. 60 Minutes tonight on CBS.
CBS Mornings. Weekdays on CBS.
The KFES 12 weather app. Alerts, radar, custom forecasts. Free from First Alert Weather. Search KFES in your app store. Sponsored by Southeast Health.
Hi, this is Lisa from 4Imprint. Yes, I like 51
Wow,
Wow.
they got lots of commercials. In other words, it must be the end of that program. Face the Nation program. Too many commercials. It's 10:31 down on the bar, so yeah, it's already done exceeded over that. All right, so now we go to something else, maybe, but then again, maybe we won't. We're going to turn right here to this report here.
China has been conducting military drills near Taiwan that seem to be escalating, at least reports from Taiwan. What should the White House next steps likely be here?
Well, what the White House is trying to do is to keep things from going too far, keep things from escalating. They expected China to react this way. If Pelosi did go there, they would have just assumed Pelosi not, because they obviously are consumed with the Ukraine war right now, and the idea of two large geopolitical crises at the same time is not what you would want if you're in the Situation Room. But they recognize that China was going to end up doing these kinds of things. The worry for them is not that China is going to take on a direct attack on Taiwan or something like that, but that something could get out of hand. Some sort of encounter between aircraft or naval vessels in the area could spill into a larger conflict. That's something that's very worrisome. And then the long-term worry for the White House is whether or not this means that we're heading into a longer, more sustained period of conflict and dispute and cold conversations when it comes to Taiwan, especially heading into the November or the fall Party Congress where Xi Jinping wants to win a third term. Is he going to be motivated to keep up some sort of hostile posture toward the United States out of his own domestic politics?
Yeah, when it comes to the long-term impact here on the White House, what's your cost-benefit analysis of Pelosi's trip?
Well, I think if you put a truth serum on the White House, they would say it's not worth the cost. In other words, it's not something that they urge her to do. They would tell you publicly. They certainly didn't tell her not to. She's the head of a co-equal branch of government. It's up to her to make her own decision. But clearly, the body language and the private conversations are in the White House. They just assumed she had not done it. They don't think it accomplished anything, and it did provoke China at a time when they want to focus on Ukraine. And when China, by the way, is important in terms of that Ukraine war. China has held back from Russia things like drones. That's why you see Moscow going to Iran to try to buy drones, because they're not able to get them from China, because even though China is sort of on Russia's side, they haven't been quite as helpful as the Russians would like them to be. The question for the White House is this going to push them to be more in Russia's camp? That's something they don't think is worth the price of a trip there. But they weren't going to tell Nancy Pelosi publicly not to go, because they didn't think that they could do that. And President Biden, having spent 36 years in the Senate, respects the independence of the congressional branch.
Yeah.
What bothers me, that all these different scenarios is all leading into the opposite direction of peace and utopia, which the fault falls back upon to the Northwest Tennesseans that never wanted to engage in the obvious diplomacy methods, as well as engage in the indoctrining that the founder of the Windmill Ministries believes in and has been preaching and teaching on for the past 30 some odd years. So the fault stops right here in Northwest Tennessee. That could have engaged in a global as well as a local committed belief through the teachings of Christ, to the prophecies out of the Bible of peace and utopia.
Branch.
Yeah, as much as it was Nancy Pelosi's right to go there, there's all these additional implications, including this additional one with Russia that we haven't even touched on yet. Peter Baker, we are out of time, but we appreciate you being with us. Why there's a new warning of potential disaster at a nuclear plant in Ukraine. And we're watching the Senate working overtime, moving slowly toward the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. So when we hear of a potential vote on the actual bill, we will bring that to you live. We'll be right back.
Let's back up what she just said about a nuclear plant in Ukraine. Let's see right here.
Why there's a new warning of potential disaster at
a new nuclear warning.
Disaster at a nuclear plant in Ukraine. And we're watching the Senate working overtime.
A nuclear plant in Ukraine that has been hit by Russia several different times, that originally was capped off. I think it actually may have had something to do with the ordeal that happened in the 90s pertaining to the, I think it was called the Chernobyl, maybe, thing that happened over in Russia that basically caused a lot of death and injury and contaminated a lot of property and a lot of people's lives. I may be wrong about the name, but the way that I understand that they have been bombarding that particular area, and they have unleashed a great deal of radiation that now is being spewed back out by that particular capped off nuclear facility, the way that I understand it. Now I may be wrong. I'm not up to date on all that stuff pertaining to whether or not it was a active nuclear plant or an inactive nuclear plant. But the bottom line is this: they did have an explosion. They did have a problem in Russia that caused contamination. I think they had to evacuate something like 3 million people pertaining to the problem that happened. And to this day, the way that I understand it, there's still just as much radiation that is lethal coming out of that particular plant today is what it was, especially if you unveil the cap that was on that particular problem. So that could lead into another catastrophe
slowly toward the past.
Just waiting to happen in regards towards the Russian-Ukraine deal. Let's see if we can pick up a little bit on it real quick.
Now to today.
Here we go, right here.
Cuba are battling a blaze at an oil storage facility that was started by a lightning strike. The fire and explosions killed one person and left at least...
No, that's something else. That's over in Cuba. Stop right there.
Now to today's other top stories. Firefighters in Cuba are battling a blaze at an oil storage facility that was started by a lightning strike. The fire and explosions killed one person and left at least 120 other people injured. Cuban authorities say 17 firefighters are still missing. At least 9 people were injured at a mass shooting in one of Cincinnati's most popular nightlife areas. Police say a gunman opened fire during a fight and then fled the scene after an officer fired shots at him. The suspect remains at large. It's not clear whether he was hit. And more than 700 flights in the U.S. today are canceled after several issues, and the numbers keep going up as far as the cancellations go. This is the 4th straight day of massive cancellations and delays after thunderstorms pounded major airports on the East Coast. More than 600 flights were canceled on Saturday as well, in one of the worst days of summer travel season. We're going to turn now to the war in Ukraine, though. A cargo vessel carrying 66,000 tons of corn left Ukraine earlier today. Russian news agencies also say another 3 ships with agricultural products left Ukrainian ports today. Meanwhile, the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency is warning of potential disaster at a nuclear plant in Ukraine. It's now in Russian hands, and heavy shelling there could risk radiation leak or worse. NBC's Morgan Chesky is in eastern Ukraine for us with an update on the developing situation there, Morgan. Fairly serious.
Yeah, Corey, one of the reasons this is so concerning is that this plant isn't just the largest in Ukraine, but in all of Europe. And it's located just a few hours south of us in the highly contested area of Zaporizhzhia. Now, the plant fell under Russian control back in March, but this series of explosions has now ignited blame and fear of a potential nuclear
Fears rising about the fate of Ukraine's largest nuclear plant.
It's now under Russian control, and multiple blasts there during the fighting have damaged high-voltage wires, sparking concern about potential disaster.
What we have in Zaporizhia, what we have in Ukraine, the situation is really a volatile one.
The United Nations nuclear watchdog saying every principle of nuclear safety has been violated. Their biggest concern, shelling making it too dangerous for inspectors to assess the damage. Ukraine accusing Russia of using the plant near the city of Zaporizhia as cover, allowing Russia to shell nearby cities without retaliation. Ukraine.
And the reason why I don't think they're going to mention this, the reason why they might, but the reason why that it's crucial that electricity is going to that plant is because it takes a certain amount of extensive power for the cooler reactors to work to make sure that the temperatures stay below a certain level, and once it exceeds that temperature level, then you take a chance on it basically turning into a total disaster as far as a major explosion. Now, the ordeal that it just showed pertaining to the lightning strike over in, I think it was Cuba, obviously somebody didn't do the right thing in putting in electric rod sensors that are supposed to be planted all around that particular tank, and there's supposed to be wires that goes around and on top of those tanks. That way, if lightning was to strike, instead of it hitting the actual tank, it would hit one of the rods and it would drive itself down to the ground where the closest conductor was that goes to the ground. Obviously, somebody must not have put in those safety features for a lightning bolt to strike and cause that to blow up. Once more, what is that going to do to the prices over in Cuba? What is that going to do with the struggling situation that's already struggling over in Cuba? It is going to worsen it. Just like if this nuclear reactor goes off, what is that going to do to not only the Ukrainians, but also by contaminating food and contaminating seeds and contaminating other things, that is only going to exacerbate the problem even worse.
President outraged.
This is the largest nuclear power plant on our continent, and any shelling of this factory is an open, brazen crime, an act of terror.
All this as Russia keeps up its slow march across the eastern part of Ukraine, the fighting showing no signs of letting up. The nearby town of Nikopol hit hard Saturday. Officials saying a rocket strike injured 3 and damaged up to 40 homes, as well as a kindergarten classroom.
These are the covers for the helmets.
Meanwhile, just an hour and a half from the front lines, volunteers in the city of Poltava collecting and creating whatever they can to help equip Ukrainian soldiers. You're fighting for them?
Yes. They fight for me, I fight for them.
Now, as of this morning, UN officials say it doesn't appear any of these reactors were damaged or that there has been any leak of radiation. That said, the longer this plant remains in Russian hands, the bigger problem it poses for Ukraine, especially come wintertime. This country relies on nuclear energy for more than half of its power. We'll send it back to you.
Morgan Chesky, thank you. Next, we're going to talk about unexpected outcomes and this Washington Post headline that reads, quote, a challenge for anti-abortion states, doctors reluctant to work there. The new signs abortion may play a bigger role in the midterms than some Republicans ever thought.
To end all this only is going in the wrong direction of a civilized global society towards peace and utopia. Everything that you have just seen and witnessed today is a contributing factor of going in the opposite direction of peace and utopia. It bothers me. It bothers me that humanity is dead set and want to go down, obviously, this road of doom and gloom. And it really breaks my heart because of all the souls that, if something like this was to occur towards a major atomic nuclear disaster that could lead into more disasters, it bothers me that so many souls have never given their heart and their life over to Christ are going to now either go to hell or be hanging in the balances towards not going to heaven until the great final day of the white throne judgment occurs, that those souls could have been saved or spared, because the Bible talks about that God would rather that none perish and that all be saved. None perish. That's the will of the Father, that none perish. But if they haven't never given their heart and their life over to Christ, and they wind up perishing, what do you think is going to happen to their soul? It's not going to go to heaven. It's not going to go to heaven. That's sad. That is super, super sad. And to think that we're still dealing with these problems here in America pertaining to racism, pertaining to anti-Semitism, pertaining to abortions as far as women and reproduction, acts pertaining to a woman's decision of whether or not she can legally even have an abortion. All these are all accelerating contribution factors of going in the wrong direction of peace and utopia. So whenever I put information like this out, it actually breaks my heart, because I feel like that I am the bad news barrier that is contradicting that in which what I've been teaching and preaching now for the past 30 some odd years. Good luck to each and every one of us. We pray that if you've never had an opportunity of surrendering to the Lord Jesus Christ, that you would do so before it is too late. We pray for our nation. We pray for our country. We pray for the world. We pray that things will turn in the right direction, and that we will see eventually that utopia, or that peace that is promised through the covenants of God, through various prophets, of seeing a manifestation of a revival that will lead into a revolution towards the end time days. That's what we're praying for and believing in. Thanks again for listening. Good luck to each and every one of us. God bless America. God bless our troops. God bless our endeavors towards where we go from here pertaining to our republic, our United States Republic. And good luck and shalom.